At 2:14 a.m. on September 15th, 2025, a sudden flash ripped across the horizon, followed by a thunderous blast that shattered the night silence of the southern Caribbean. Within minutes, flames consumed a speedboat, its hull torn apart, its wreckage vanishing beneath the waves. According to Reuters, the U.S. military confirmed it had carried out what it called a kinetic strike against a cartel drug vessel operating in international waters, killing 3 people on board and destroying its cargo. The target was no ordinary smuggling boat. Intelligence reports suggested it was carrying a large quantity of cocaine and fentanyl, a combination worth billions of dollars on U.S. streets. For Washington, this wasn't just about narcotics, it was about national security. What makes this strike extraordinary is its precision and symbolism. A single drone, invisible in the dark sky, unleashed one missile that ended an entire operation in seconds. No prolonged chase, no drawn-out firefight, just a flash, an explosion, and silence. But this was only the beginning. The strike raises urgent questions. How far are smugglers willing to risk everything for profit when racing through the night with deadly cargo? And what does this operation reveal about the precision and discipline of an elite U.S. force that can end such missions with a single, calculated strike? Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe to Military Power, where we uncover the hidden truths behind modern warfare. Recently, smugglers have begun using sleek speedboats, their cargo hidden under tarps, slicing through darkness to evade detection. Intelligence reports allege that one such vessel was capable of carrying tons of cocaine, a combination worth billions of US dollars. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid many times more potent than morphine, has driven the worst public health crisis in U.S. history. In 2024 alone, synthetic opioids, including fentanyl, were involved in over 48,000 fatal overdoses, according to preliminary data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Washington now sees the flow of these substances not just as a law enforcement challenge, but as a direct threat to national security. The danger was clear, but danger alone does not decide the outcome. The real suspense lay in the hunt itself. How would U.S. forces track a vessel racing through the night, hidden under tarps, and determined to vanish into the Caribbean darkness? The first sign appeared just after 2 a.m., high above the southern Caribbean. An HC-144 Ocean Sentry swept its sensors across the water. One disturbance stood out, a faint trail out of place in the calm night sea. No lights, no AIS beacon, just a jagged signature moving fast, too fast to be innocent. Infrared cameras locked on. Against the cool background of open water, the target glowed hot, its engines straining as it cut through waves at more than 30 knots. Data poured back to the U.S. Command Center. Speed, heading, thermal spikes. Analysts didn't need long to recognize the pattern. This wasn't fishing. This was a narco boat running dark. Below the surface, calm, tension built. Every zig and zag of the vessel screamed urgency. Smugglers believed the night would protect them, that raw speed was their shield. Instead, it betrayed them. The more they pushed the engines, the brighter the heat trail shone. The darker the sea, the more obvious the absence of lights became. Their invisibility turned into a beacon. From the command room, the picture sharpened. A boat with no identification, no registration, moving erratically across international waters. The profile was clear. If it carried what intelligence suggested, tons of cocaine and a lethal supply of fentanyl, this was more than smuggling. It was a threat to American lives thousands of miles away. Still, U.S. forces held. No premature strike. Every movement was logged, every angle cross-checked. The hunt was not about chasing blindly, it was about patience, building an ironclad case, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Above, the Ocean Sentry maintained silent watch. Below, commanders weighed their options. On the water, the speedboat's crew pushed harder, convinced they were outpacing the night. In reality, the noose was tightening. And then the twist. What the smugglers thought was cover, speed, and darkness had become the very evidence locking them in. The real question now is this: what measures would the U.S. military deploy to stop such a reckless move before it reached American shores? As the speedboat's silhouette drifted between shadows, U.S. forces prepared their next move. Far below, the RBS-2 glided over dark waves. It is just 28 feet 8 inches long, beam 8 feet 5 inches, built of aluminum alloy, displacement about 8,300 pounds. It could reach over 40 knots and cruising for 150 nautical miles under ideal conditions. On board, the crew strained their eyes, engines muted, hearts pounding, closing the distance without being seen. Overhead, the MQ-9 Reaper dominated the sky. It has a wingspan of 66 feet, long endurance loitering capability, armed with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and laser-guided bombs GBU-12. It hovered beyond detection, sensors sweeping. Every turn of the vessel below, every heat flare, every deviation from course, precisely mapped. Every minute passed like hours. RBS-2 stayed outside too close for comfort, yet far enough to not be noticed. The U.S. command checked and double-checked their rules. Is this still in international waters? Is there diplomatic risk? They waited. When the speedboat slipped beyond Venezuela's territorial waters, a sliver of protection vanishing, legal constraints loosened. That was the cue. U.S. rules of engagement and international law required jurisdictional clarity. Patience mattered more than action. It was discipline in action. Inside the RBS-2 cabin, communications crackled. Coordinates confirmed. Reaper in position. The crew felt the tension, every second balanced between waiting and reacting. Below, the vessel's crew kept racing through darkness, thinking speed was their ally. Above, Reaper operators traced its thermal signature, watched its waves, predicted its path. The night sky held its breath. From Command Center, the order was simple. Only strike when legality, ethics, and precision all aligned. U.S. forces were not there to make mistakes. The mission demanded certainty. The RBS-2 hovered in readiness just above the black water, and meanwhile the Reaper sat poised on invisible thermals, sensors locked and weapons armed. Yet even with hardware in place, one crucial piece remained: legal confirmation that the strike could proceed. Seconds stretched and radios hissed. Commanders cross-checked coordinates, rules of engagement, and diplomatic risk, inching closer to a decision with every pulse of the weathered clock. Only when law, ethics, and timing aligned with the final order come, then and only then would precise force be unleashed. Justice would be sought with measured violence, and relentless discipline would turn planning into action. The warning came first, cutting through the dark over open water. The order carried across the waves from the pursuing crew, then repeated, slower, firmer, leaving space for compliance. The target kept surging north, riding its own wake, still blacked out, still silent. In these moments, procedure matters. U.S. maritime forces are trained to escalate, step by measured step, verbal and acoustic warnings. Then, if ignored, signaling and coercive measures such as warning shots, and only afterward disabling fire if a vessel refuses to obey. That ladder of force is not theater. It is doctrine, rehearsed to reduce risk and preserve evidence while compelling a dangerous boat to stop. Overhead, the orbiting aircraft held its line, sensors keyed to every change in speed and heading. Below, the chase tightened. The crew on the intercept boat repeated commands, toggling lights and sirens in accordance with the non-compliant vessel playbook, while the command center tracked the coordinates that would decide everything. The target had pushed beyond the line into international waters, where U.S. forces had publicly asserted the earlier kinetic strike occurred, and where this second operation was now unfolding. The legal footing was stronger here. No coastal state consent was required, and the jurisdictional picture was clearer. Then came the pivot from suspicion to authority. Without a flag, without registration, a vessel at sea can be treated as stateless, stripped of the protections that flow from nationality and subject to enforcement under U.S. law on the high seas. Under the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, stateless craft are vessels subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, closing a loophole that cartels have long tried to exploit. International law points the same direction. States must cooperate to suppress illicit drug trafficking on the high seas. Together, these frameworks turn a fast, unmarked hull into a lawful target for interdiction when warnings fail. The crew's choices narrowed: comply and heave to, or gamble on speed. They gambled. Engines roared. Wake widened. The bridge team pursuing them kept cadence. Commands logged, time stamped, locations verified, because each step would be scrutinized later. The doctrine of escalation is not simply about tactics, it is about building an evidentiary chain that shows restraint until action becomes necessary and lawful. As the minutes dragged, the question traveled up the net. Had the threshold been met? The answer depended on conduct, position, and refusal, on whether the target had ignored warnings long enough, on whether it remained outside territorial waters, and on whether disabling force or a precision strike would pose the least risk to bystanders and the boarding team. On the water, the scene compressed into seconds. Another warning, no response. The chase platform slid to a standoff angle, ready to pivot if the target swerved or tried to ram. Overhead, the aircraft maintained a clean line of sight, its role as witness as important as its role as overwatch. Within this choreography, escalation is designed to be predictable for one reason: predictability deters. When a stateless, non-compliant vessel ignores the full sequence of warnings, the calculus changes from pursuit to lawful interdiction. When patience meets defiance on the open sea, what happens in the very next second? Restraint or fire? The moment arrived faster than anyone expected. One instant, the speedboat was still charging through the Caribbean darkness at more than 30 knots, its engines hammering against the waves, its wake glowing white against the Black Sea. The next, U.S. operators gave the signal. The MQ-9 Reaper, circling far above, locked its sensors on the moving target. Every second mattered. The window was small, the boat was fast, erratic, zigzagging through swells in a desperate attempt to stay ahead. But the drone tracked it without hesitation, compensating for every sudden change of course, calculating trajectory down to the second. On the water, the RBS-2 shadowed just beyond visual range. Crew tense, waiting for the final call. Inside the command center, screens lit up with confirmation. Coordinates locked, target verified, rules of engagement cleared. The decision had to come now. Beneath the drone's wing, the Hellfire missile armed itself silently. Cold metal, primed for release. Then came the call. The trigger was pressed. The missile tore away into the night. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Only the steady hum of the drone's propeller above the clouds. Then the horizon lit up. The Hellfire plunged into the starboard side of the speedboat with surgical accuracy, despite the vessel's frantic speed. No warning shot, no second chance. The hull erupted instantly. A burst of fire ripped the wooden planks apart, shredding the structure as if it were paper. Engine parts and steel fragments spun into the air, scattering across the waves. Within seconds, flames leapt from the cargo hold, racing across the deck, consuming fuel and narcotics together. The boat bucked violently under the blast. Its stern twisted, the bow lifted, and then crashed down into the sea. In less than 40 seconds, the vessel was no longer intact. Heat waves shimmered across the water. Smoke coiled upward like a black flag against the night sky. As the fire spread, the speedboat began to fold in on itself. The rear section collapsed inward, the deck groaned, and seawater rushed through shattered beams. The flames, once fierce, started to mix with steam as the ocean claimed the wreck. The boat lurched sideways, taking on water at a terrifying pace. Within moments, the once fast smuggling craft was reduced to a wreck barely holding together. Reflections from the fire danced across the dark water, illuminating fragments drifting free. Deck planks, broken engines, and, most damning, bundled cargo. Containers had burst open under the force of the blast. Packages wrapped in plastic bobbed to the surface, some ripped apart, spilling white powder across the waves. For a brief, haunting moment, the sea itself seemed dusted in cocaine. What was meant to bring billions of dollars onto American streets now floated uselessly in the open ocean, a testament to both greed and failure. Scattered debris marked the spot. Smoke rose like a beacon, and burning fragments drifted on the swells. The RBS-2, still holding position, witnessed the destruction in real time. The MQ-9 Reaper high above continued to circle, its camera capturing the entire sequence, every second from lock-on to detonation, proof that the strike was precise, deliberate, and executed exactly as planned. When it was over, the sea closed around the wreck. Nothing salvageable remained beneath the surface except smoldering ruins. The speedboat, once trusted for its speed and agility, lay broken and drowned. What seconds before had been a high-speed escape was now a graveyard of debris. One strike, one missile, one decision made in a heartbeat, and an entire smuggling operation was erased. For cartels, moments like this are rare catastrophes, crippling losses that ripple through their networks. For the United States, it was not only a tactical success, but also a message, clear, calculated, and impossible to ignore. The sea had claimed the speedboat, but the consequences were just beginning. RBS-2 returned to the scene soon after the strike. Crews worked in dim light, pulling 3 lifeless bodies from the water. Above, the HC-144 flying overhead captured aerial footage. Flames, smoke, floating debris. The video released on social media by the White House shows the moment the boat erupts in fire, then drifts helplessly, then splits apart. The announcement drew global attention, sparking debate and outrage as cartel organizations were seen to be growing ever more reckless in their attempts to challenge U.S. power at sea. Investigators on the U.S. side noted the vessel carried no flag, no registration number. Stateless boats on the high seas have fewer protections under maritime law. That status made it easier, under U.S. rules of engagement, to treat the craft as legitimate target once warnings went unheeded. Meanwhile, efforts to identify the 3 deceased were underway. According to official statements, identities were verified post-strike by matching documents recovered from the wreck and forensic analysis. U.S. military confirmed no other people were found alive. The U.S. government released a formal statement announcing the strike, providing coordinates, asserting the operation was in international waters, and warning that any nation facilitating or ignoring cartel operations would face increased scrutiny. According to reports, U.S. forces say they recovered more than 2 tons of cocaine and 50 kilograms of fentanyl, worth billions on illicit markets, along with digital evidence, video from UAVs, infrared thermal signatures, pressure sensor logs, and satellite tracks. These materials are being used to build the public case, proof of drugs aboard, proof of threat, proof of justification. The strike's fallout is massive. For the cartels, loss of cargo, loss of personnel, loss of secrecy. For the U.S., a statement, rules of engagement, once considered legal gray zones, are being exercised openly. The ocean is still dark, the waves still roll, but now there is testimony, bodies, cargo, videos, and the unmistakable message: the U.S. is stepping up. The question is what comes next, how cartels will respond, and whether international norms tighten or erode in this new era of high seas interdiction. On September 15th, 2025, the Caribbean was turned into a stage where patience, technology, and law converged. The kinetic strike against the cartel vessel demonstrated more than just firepower. It showed how the United States is willing to wait, calculate, and act with precision when the moment is right. From the HC-144's surveillance sweep to the RBS-2's silent approach, and finally, the MQ-9 Reaper's decisive strike, the operation unfolded as a textbook example of coordination across air and sea. In that instant, the fight against cartels shifted from routine interdictions to a campaign where uncrewed aircraft and precision missiles ensure that smugglers have no margin to escape. Yet the bigger picture remains unsettled. Will cartels continue to gamble on speed and darkness? Or Will the growing shadow of American UAVs force them to change tactics? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Military Power so you never miss the next untold story of modern war.